Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast. Whether you are a sales professional, not in sales, but interested in helping people solve problems, or a founder CEO who is looking to grow your business, you'll find practical tools, stories, and experience you can apply to your role. I'm your host, Jody Mayberry, and I'm here with the founder of Catalyst Sale, Mike Simmons. Hello, Mike.
Hello, Jody.
Mike, it is so good to be here with you. And the topic we're going to talk about is one I love so much. But first, I want to tell you a story.
Hit me with your story.
No, I don't really have a story, but the topic of the episode is storytelling. So I was just fooling with you, Mike.
Jody, this is becoming a common theme. Every once in a while, you fool with me, and sometimes you've even been known to lie to me. Like you told me a story once about your grandfather doing something, and then realized that it actually wasn't even your grandfather. That was just part of the story.
I don't know if that really happened, Mike.
Well, we're going to have to go back to the archives to pull that one up.
If that did happen, it wouldn't have been recorded. At least I hope not. So on to storytelling. We want to talk about it from the perspective of the customer being the hero. So 2 parts. Why does storytelling matter in sales? And then what are you talking about when you say the customer is the hero?
Yeah, so storytelling matters in sales because you've got to get people engaged in a conversation. And I think some of the best salespeople out there are good storytellers. And I didn't really connect the dots on this in a meaningful way until I started really getting into a lot of the Donald Miller stuff that he's put out there with StoryBrand. And we've had Donald on the podcast. We've also had JJ on the podcast, and we'll include links to those. But the story provides an opportunity for the person on the other end to engage in a discussion and envision this future that is different than the current reality. And back when I was selling e-learning at a company called Skillsoft, and before that, the name of the company was SmartForce. There was one of the common comments was imagine if you will. So, and there it was like, imagine if you didn't have to send your team out to a 3-day workshop, you could shorten that to a 1-day training and create a blended learning program that had some e-learning component to it. And this is going way, way, way back in the back. So we're back into 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003 kind of time frame. But what we're trying to do is we're helping in the story with using story. We're helping someone envision a future that they're a part of that is different than the future, than the reality that they're currently in. And at that point in time, I didn't understand the distinction between a hero and a guide. I mean, conceptually I did. I'd watched Star Wars, so I understand you've got Obi-Wan Kenobi and you've got Luke Skywalker, and I get that piece. But I didn't realize how powerful the guide role was. And I think there are many people who are out there listening to it, who are listening to the episode, who may be doing this in their own work today. They're trying to be the hero. And if you're trying to be the hero, and if you've listened to Don's stuff, if you're trying to be the hero, now you're competing for resources with your customer, because the reality is they're working on being the hero in their own story. So take on that more powerful role, that guide, the guide that helps them make that transition from where they are today to where they'd like to be at some point in the future.
Yeah, the book that ties all this together that Mike has mentioned is Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller, and he has been a guest on the show. That was a fabulous episode in that book. I have read that book 3 times now, Mike. Well, if you count listening to as reading, I have read that book 3 times and physically read it once. And it's so good because it does turn things around to understand that if you position yourself as the hero, now you're just in the way of the customer rather than guiding them to what they're looking for. So it is very powerful. And I'm glad that you had him on the show, because that started to turn this idea around that stories do matter in sales.
Yeah. And you know what? I think I would say that I've always understood that they do matter, but I didn't have a framework to help describe the components of what matters and visualize it. I mean, even with all the whiteboarding that I do and how important visualization is, it wasn't until I read Donald's stuff, and we had him on the podcast, and we had talked through these things and started putting it into practice, where I actually started to build a visual framework that supports that. And I'll include this in the show notes too. This is something that we incorporate in the training that we do with customers and individual sales reps when it comes to the storytelling aspect and understanding your customer and really getting to understand all of the different characters that are in the story. And maybe that's a good transition here to start talking about those characters. You know, a lot of people think about the hero and they forget about the guide, or they think about the hero and they think about the villain and they forget about the guide. So maybe we take some time and talk about each of the individual characters in a story.
Well, there you go. You've set yourself up perfect for that. And I can also tie this back to my 8 years as a park ranger. There was a difference, I would think, in park rangers that viewed themselves as the hero. And that happens. Park visitors also view park rangers as heroes because it's a very iconic position, especially when you're wearing the Smokey Bear hat. But the best park rangers just viewed themselves as a guide helping somebody like Mike Simmons have the best possible time while they're in a park. So there's a big difference between the two, being a hero and being a guide.
Yeah, and I think a lot of sales professionals make the mistake of trying to jump in there and be the hero. And like you said, some park rangers would make the mistake. And there's a distinction between the two of those. And, you know, and we talk about this a lot too, the communicating with empathy. To communicate with empathy is not being sympathetic to somebody. It's taking the time and really understanding the world or the thing that they're looking at through the lens that they're looking at the world through. It's understanding and immersing yourself in their perspective. If you're the hero, the knight in shining armor that's going to save the day and slay the dragon and do all of these cool things, you're not giving them a chance to be the hero in their own story. And ultimately, you're competing for resources and you're making it about you and not about them. And everything that we've talked about related to this from a sales perspective is that sales is about connecting a solution, whether it's known or unknown, to a problem, whether that problem is known or unknown. And you, when you're selling your thing, when you're delivering the solution in the context of others, when you're making and helping organizations move towards success, it's not your success, it's their success. So these things really started to click after listening to Don's stuff and working through the process on my own. And I think you can look at any challenge that your customer runs into as a villain. So it may not be that time itself is the villain, but the time wasters that are out there are the villain. It may not be that employees inside the organization and getting them trained is the villain, this challenge that they're running into. It may be the engagement of the employee that is the villain. And it's really hard to just guess and be right on point about who the villain is. So that means you've got to ask questions and you've got to engage with others to understand what their specific challenges are and why those are challenges and what they're doing about them. So make sure you're identifying the right villain in the story and not assuming that someone's running into a villain just because you think everybody does.
Well, we've talked about the hero, which is the customer, the guide, which is the salesperson. Now you mentioned the villain, which is a problem. How important is that villain to the story that a salesperson should be telling?
I think it's critical. If you assume that you're dealing with the wrong villain, there's so much risk in actually helping someone execute on whatever it is that they're trying to do. There's so much risk in helping the person on the other end make it through this journey that they're going through. And too many times, sales professionals make the assumption that they know what the villain is, and they start pitching product, feature, functionality to their customers. They make a lot of assumptions. So identifying and clarifying and confirming who the villains are and how those roles are changing is really critical inside a sales process and inside a sales cycle. I think another thing that's really important here is understanding that sometimes people change roles. Sometimes those villains change roles inside an organization. And if you're not asking those questions of your customer, if you're not engaging with the customer, there's a lot of risk that you may assume somebody is a different character than they actually are.
Are there any other parts of the story or characters we need to look at? We've got the hero, the guide, the villain. Is there anything else that plays a role?
I don't think on the as far as the characters, as far as the players. I mean, the thing that I would highlight is know who all of the people are. And I remember, the old Mr. Rogers song. Who are the people in your neighborhood? And it might even be a Sesame Street song, and I forget which one it is. But the understanding who the players are inside the scenario and having an account plan that documents who all these players are. And then once you understand that problem, the villain, you should be able to figure out the obstacles that are going to get in the way of this transition that the hero needs to make from where they are today to what success looks like. So this is that idea of imagining if everybody inside the organization was engaged in your learning program, or imagining if everybody inside your organization was following the processes that you've implemented, or imagine if you could create a high level of predictability in your forecast and you didn't have to do the Excel jujitsu to try to figure out where you're going to end a year or where you're going to end a quarter. So I think the next piece is that transition from where they are today to what success looks like.
It's important that you mention that, what success looks like, because it's not much of a story if you don't know what success looks like, because how can you tell that story? How can you bridge the transition if you don't know what that looks like? And that's where it comes in of identifying the villain, because usually that's going to be success when you overcome that villain, the time wasters or the examples that Mike mentioned. So Mike, if we focus on that, what success looks like, how do we find that out for our particular customer, or even with the product we're selling? How do we find out what success looks like?
Yeah, so I think this is where you can make some assumptions, but you want to validate those assumptions. So you're an expert. You have a high level of expertise in a specific field that you're engaged in. You have access to information, more information than your customers have in that given field. You can provide some insight, some expertise, some guidance, and this is where we get back into the guide component, some guidance to your customer relative to things that they should be aware of, or relative to what that transition looks like, or relative to the plan that helps them execute. You can help them reveal the villains or reveal the challenges that are in front of them by asking questions. So don't assume things, even though I said, hey, we can make some assumptions, make some broad assumptions, validate those assumptions by asking questions and confirming with the customer if this is a challenge or if this is something they've experienced. Share with them some of the experience that you've seen in the market. I mean, when we've worked with organizations like yours, we've historically seen this. And here's how we've overcome this. Or maybe even ask them the question, how have you overcome that, to get them engaged in the discussion?
All right. Mike, is there, in this idea of storytelling, you've laid out the characters and the different pieces that we need, what success looks like. And again, this all comes from the book, Building a Story Brand by Donald Miller. And you can listen to the episode with him or with J.J. Peterson. They've both been on the show. Mike, is there anything else that you want us to know about the role of storytelling in sales?
Yeah, I think the key piece is it's not about you. It's about your customer. And I know we talk about that a lot, but it's not about you. It's about your customer. And if you're really focused on helping your customer, you're going to take the time to learn what's important to them and know that there's a process. Know that there's a journey that people are going to go through, a decision-making process that they're going to go through. You can map out what that decision-making process looks like. You can create a plan that helps the customer move towards success, helps the hero move towards success. And you can, as you deliver that, you can highlight areas of risk and areas of opportunity. You take a look at the show notes, look at how we've kind of diagrammed and documented this out and how we share this with the community. And I look forward to just hearing how everybody out there is applying story in their role as a sales professional, in their role influencing others, in their role calling people to action.
Yeah, I like that idea of just letting us know what you learn and what you're doing here involved in story. And I want to mention one other thing. In the book, Building a Story Brand, if you buy the book, you get access to a piece of software that helps you build a brand script. And I use that a lot. I know Mike uses that, but it's been amazing how filling that out several times, every time I start a project, every time I'm thinking of doing something new, I walk through that process, and it helps you start to think through if I'm going to put out a course. For example, I'm working on a course about podcasting. Well, I walk through that, and it lays it out like a story, and you start to think through it differently. And I have found that's a really good tool to make sure you're not looking at yourself as a hero. So there's a lot of good things about it. One of my favorites, though, is it forces you to think as a guide and not as the hero. So that's been really helpful. Have you found that to be true for you, Mike?
Yeah, absolutely, Jody. And I think one of the big things it's done for me is it's helped reveal blind spots and identify areas or perspective that I might not have, or things that I need to shift. And that's the advantage of a simple set of methods or simple process is it's repeatable. And whether you want to call it a method or a framework or process, and we can dig through the semantics of that at some other point in time if people want us to get into it. But having a framework to be able to go through to help reveal what is known and what is unknown, and where some of those blind spots has been really powerful and is very important to me.
All right. If you want to reach out to us and let us know what you discover as you work through this, the best way is Twitter. Mike, tell us where we can find you on Twitter.
So Simmons_M is where I am pretty active. And, I talk about a bunch of things, whether it's sports or food or learning or sales. Then @CatalystSale is the company Twitter account. And you can live chat with us whenever you want at catalystsale.com, and just hit the live chat button, and that goes right into our Slack instance. And you'll find that you usually get a response, depending on the time of day, you usually get a response, and 9 times out of 10, that response is from me.
All right. Thank you so much, Mike. And thank you for listening to the Catalyst Sale Podcast.